The morning sun cast long shadows across Pearl Harbor as Seaman First Class James Mitchell adjusted his white sailor's cap and prepared for another routine. Sunday at the naval base. December 7th, 1941 began like any other peaceful weekend in paradise, with gentle trade winds carrying the scent of plumeria across the pristine waters of Oahu. The battleships Arizona, Oklahoma, and West Virginia sat majestically in battleship row, their steel hulls gleaming in the early Hawaiian sun, while sailors enjoyed their precious shore leave in nearby Honolulu. Admiral Husband Kimmel had risen early that morning, unaware that his peaceful command would soon become the epicenter of America's entry into the Second World War. The Pacific Fleet appeared invincible as it rested in what many considered the most secure harbor in the Pacific Ocean. Intelligence reports had suggested possible Japanese movements in Southeast Asia, but few military leaders believed Emperor Hirohito's forces would dare strike American soil directly. Meanwhile, 350 miles north of Hawaii, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's task force carved through the Pacific swells under cover of radio silence. 6 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, formed the most powerful naval strike force ever assembled, carrying over 400 aircraft in their steel bellies. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida meticulously reviewed his attack plans one final time, knowing that within hours, his pilots would either achieve complete surprise or face devastating defeat. The Japanese fleet had maintained absolute secrecy during their 14-day voyage from Hitakapu Bay in the Kuril Islands. Radio operators remained silent. Garbage was stored rather than thrown overboard, and even cooking fires were extinguished to prevent detection. Every detail had been planned with mathematical precision by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of this audacious assault on American naval power. As dawn approached on December 7th, the first wave of Japanese aircraft began launching from their carriers at 6 o'clock in the morning. 183 planes, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, horizontal bombers, and fighter escorts formed up in the gray morning sky. Their engines created a thunderous symphony that would soon echo across the Pacific, marking the beginning of America's involvement in the global conflict that had already consumed Europe and Asia. Back at Pearl Harbor, the morning watch continued their peaceful routines. Mess halls prepared Sunday breakfast, while chaplains readied themselves for religious services. The base's radar station at Opana Point detected unusual aircraft approaching from the north at 7:25 in the morning, but operators dismissed the contacts as American Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses expected to arrive from California. According to historical accounts documented in the New York Times archives from December 8, 1941, the tranquil morning atmosphere would shatter within minutes as the first Japanese bombs found their targets. The peaceful Sunday that began with sailors writing letters home and officers planning holiday leave would transform into a day that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would declare would live in infamy. The stage was set for a surprise attack that would fundamentally alter the course of world history, drawing the sleeping giant of American industrial might into a war that would span continents and reshape the global balance of power for generations to come. At 7:48 in the morning, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida's voice crackled across Japanese radio frequencies with the fateful words, "Tora! Tora! Tora!" The code confirming complete tactical surprise had been achieved. Below his Nakajima B-5N Kate bomber, Pearl Harbor spread out like a detailed military map, with American warships arranged in perfect formation for destruction. The first bombs fell on Ford Island's Naval Air Station, where rows of consolidated PBY Catalina flying boats sat defenseless on the tarmac. Lieutenant Commander Kakuichi Takahashi led his dive bombers in screaming attacks against the airfield, ensuring American aircraft could not mount an effective counterattack. Explosions rippled across the base as fuel tanks erupted in towering columns of black smoke and orange flame. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata's torpedo bombers swept in low across the harbor's calm waters, their specially modified Type 91 torpedoes designed to function in the shallow, 40-foot depths. The massive battleship Oklahoma took multiple torpedo hits on her port side, causing catastrophic flooding that would soon seal the fate of 415 sailors trapped below decks. Aboard the battleship Arizona, Rear Admiral Isaac Kidd was enjoying his morning coffee when the first explosion shattered the peaceful Sunday atmosphere. Within minutes, Japanese bombers had transformed his flagship into a floating inferno. At 8:06 in the morning, a devastating blast, likely caused by a bomb penetrating the forward magazine, split the Arizona in two, killing Admiral Kidd and Captain Franklin van Valkenburg instantly, along with over 1,000 crew members. The surprise was so complete that many American servicemen initially believed they were witnessing a realistic training exercise. Seaman First Class Russell Lott aboard the cruiser, Phoenix watched in fascination as what he assumed were American planes performed incredibly realistic mock attacks. Only when machine gun bullets began splintering the deck around his feet did the terrible reality become clear. Captain Mervyn Bennion of the battleship West Virginia organized damage control efforts even as Japanese bombs and torpedoes turned his ship into a blazing wreck. Despite mortal wounds from bomb fragments, Bennion remained at his post directing firefighting operations until his death, embodying the courage that would define American resistance throughout the coming war. The harbor's waters became a hellscape of burning oil, drowning sailors, and sinking warships. The Oklahoma capsized completely, trapping hundreds of men in air pockets within her overturned hull. Rescue crews would spend days cutting through the ship's bottom, racing against time to save survivors as oxygen supplies dwindled in the twisted steel compartments. Fighter pilot Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor managed to reach Halaiwa Airfield and get his Curtiss P-40 Warhawk airborne, despite the chaos. Along with Lieutenant George Welch, Taylor engaged Japanese aircraft in aerial combat, shooting down several enemy planes and proving that American fighting spirit remained unbroken despite the devastating surprise attack. The second wave of Japanese aircraft, led by Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki, arrived at 8:54 in the morning to finish the destruction. 170 additional bombers and fighters concentrated their attacks on Pearl Harbor's naval facilities, oil storage tanks, and any remaining operational aircraft. However, by this time, American anti-aircraft defenses had awakened to the threat, filling the sky with deadly flak that claimed several Japanese aircraft. The coordinated assault demonstrated Japanese naval aviation's superiority in tactics, training, and equipment. Their pilots had practiced the attack for months, using detailed models of Pearl Harbor to memorize every target. The devastating effectiveness of their strike would force American military leaders to completely reassess their strategic assumptions about Pacific warfare and naval aviation's decisive role in modern combat. The acrid smell of burning oil and cordite filled the air as Pearl Harbor transformed into a scene from Dante's Inferno. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the harbor's once pristine waters had become a slick of burning petroleum, dotted with the desperate faces of sailors struggling to survive in the flaming sea. The battleship California, struck by 2 torpedoes and a bomb, began her slow death spiral, as Damage Control Officer Lieutenant Commander Arthur Davis fought valiantly to save his ship. Aboard the sinking Oklahoma, Seaman First Class Stephen Young found himself trapped in a rapidly flooding compartment with 20 other sailors. As the massive battleship rolled onto her side, Young and his shipmates clawed their way through twisted passages in complete darkness, guided only by the sound of rushing water and their desperate will to live. 14 men would die in that steel tomb, but Young's leadership helped save 6 others who would later testify to his extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. The destroyer Shaw, docked in floating dry dock number 2, erupted in a spectacular explosion when Japanese bombs detonated her forward magazine. The blast created a mushroom cloud visible from 20 miles away and sent debris raining down across the entire harbor. Photographer's mate. Second Class Martin Martinez captured the iconic image of Shaw's destruction, creating one of the most memorable photographs of the attack that would later appear in Life magazine's special December 22, 1941 edition. Chief Petty Officer John Finn, despite being wounded multiple times by strafing Japanese fighters, continued operating a .50 caliber machine gun from an exposed position at Kaneohe Naval Air Station. His sustained fire helped drive off multiple enemy aircraft while inspiring younger sailors to maintain their defensive positions. Finn's extraordinary valor would later earn him the Medal of Honor. making him one of 15 men to receive America's highest military decoration for actions during the Pearl Harbor attack. Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class, James Anderson transformed the base dispensary into a field hospital as wounded sailors poured in from across the harbor. Working without adequate supplies or assistance, Anderson performed emergency surgery and administered morphine to dozens of critically injured men. His medical log from that morning records treating over 70 casualties, many with severe burns from the flaming oil that covered much of the harbor's surface. The light cruiser Raleigh, commanded by Captain Robert Simons, managed to avoid capsizing despite taking a torpedo hit that flooded several compartments. Simons ordered his crew to jettison topside weight, including aircraft and ammunition, while damage control teams worked frantically to shore up bulkheads. The ship's survival became a testament to superior American damage control training and the determination of her crew to keep fighting. At Wheeler Field, 2nd Lieutenant Philip Rasmussen climbed into his damaged Curtiss P-36 Hawk, wearing only purple pajamas and a flight jacket. Despite his aircraft having no ammunition and significant battle damage, Rasmussen engaged Japanese fighters in aerial combat, using aggressive maneuvering to disrupt their strafing runs against ground targets. His unconventional appearance and fearless flying became legendary among surviving pilots. The submarine base's torpedo shop, under the direction of Lieutenant Commander William Brockman, began immediately manufacturing replacement warheads for the Pacific Fleet's submarine force. Brockman recognized that America's underwater vessels would soon carry the war directly to Japanese home waters, and his facility's rapid response helped maintain submarine operations during the critical early months of the Pacific Campaign. The attack entered its final phase, American resistance had begun to stiffen significantly. Anti-aircraft batteries that had been caught completely off guard were now filling the sky with defensive fire. The destroyer Bagley managed to get underway and began laying down covering fire for smaller vessels attempting to escape the harbor. Her aggressive maneuvering and accurate gunnery demonstrated that American naval fighting spirit remained unbroken despite the devastating surprise assault. The human cost was becoming tragically apparent as rescue crews worked desperately to save trapped sailors throughout the harbor. By 10 o'clock in the morning, Pearl Harbor resembled a vision of maritime apocalypse, with 7 battleships either sunk, beached, or severely damaged along Battleship Row. The massive Pennsylvania, flagship of the Pacific Fleet, sat helplessly in Dry Dock No. 1 as Japanese dive bombers screamed down through increasingly heavy anti-aircraft fire. Gunner's mate, First Class Alvin Kernan, watched in fascination and terror as enemy aircraft maneuvered between towering columns of black smoke to deliver their deadly payloads with surgical precision. The light cruiser, Helena, moored alongside the minelayer Oglala at Dock 1010, shuddered violently as a torpedo intended for her struck both vessels simultaneously. The concussion lifted Oglala completely out of the water before she crashed back down with her hull fatally compromised. Captain Robert English of Helena immediately ordered his crew to battle stations, and within minutes, the cruiser's 5-inch guns were adding their voice to the growing chorus of American defensive fire. Pharmacist's mate First Class John Osborne established an emergency aid station in the relative safety of a concrete bunker, treating an endless stream of wounded sailors with supplies scavenged from damaged medical facilities. His improvised triage system saved dozens of lives as he worked tirelessly to stabilize burn victims and trauma cases with nothing more than basic first aid equipment and extraordinary determination. The Japanese attack reached its crescendo when Lieutenant Commander Agusa's dive bombers concentrated their fury on the dry-docked Pennsylvania and destroyers Cassin and Downs. The 2 destroyers, sitting side by side in the dry dock, erupted in spectacular explosions as their magazines detonated. The Pennsylvania, though damaged by bomb hits, remained operational and would soon join the hunt for Admiral Nagumo's retreating carrier task force. Commander Logan Ramsey at Ford Island's command center managed to transmit the historic message that would alert the world to the attack. Air Raid Pearl Harbor X. This is no drill. His calm professionalism under extreme stress ensured that Hawaiian Department Headquarters and the War Department in Washington received accurate intelligence about the scope and severity of the Japanese assault within minutes of its commencement. Theta. Destroyer Nevada, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Francis Scanland, made a heroic attempt to reach the open sea and join the battle against the Japanese fleet. As the only battleship to get underway during the attack, Nevada became the focus of intensive enemy attention. Japanese pilots concentrated their attacks on the moving ship, hoping to sink her in the harbor channel and block the entrance for months. Realizing that Nevada's sinking in the channel would trap the entire Pacific fleet, harbor pilot Captain William Burford made the agonizing decision to beach the battleship on Hospital Point. The Nevada's grounding prevented a strategic disaster that could have paralyzed American naval operations in the Pacific for the remainder of 1942. At Hickam Field, Technical Sergeant William Rasmussen organized the defense of the base's aircraft maintenance facilities, despite having no military training in ground combat. Using hunting rifles and pistols taken from the base armory, Rasmussen's improvised squad engaged Japanese fighters strafing the airfield, proving that American ingenuity could compensate for lack of preparation. The attack's intensity began diminishing as Japanese aircraft exhausted their ammunition and fuel supplies. Commander Fuchida, circling high above the carnage to assess damage and coordinate the withdrawal, could see that his mission had achieved devastating success. 8 battleships lay damaged or destroyed, over 300 aircraft had been eliminated, and American naval power in the Pacific appeared crippled. However, the absence of American aircraft carriers from Pearl Harbor meant that the Pacific Fleet's most valuable assets had escaped destruction. The Enterprise, under Captain George Murray, was returning from Wake Island, while the Lexington was en route to Midway Island. These flat tops would soon spearhead America's counteroffensive across the Pacific, proving that Yamamoto's strategic gamble had failed to deliver the decisive blow he had hoped to achieve. As the last Japanese aircraft disappeared into the azure Pacific sky at approximately 10:30 in the morning, an eerie silence settled over Pearl Harbor, broken only by the crackling of flames and the desperate cries of trapped sailors. The magnitude of the disaster became horrifyingly clear as rescue crews began the grim task of accounting for the dead and wounded scattered across the 7-mile length of the naval base. Rear Admiral Patrick Bellinger surveyed the devastation from his headquarters at Ford Island, watching helplessly as the pride of the American Pacific Fleet burned in the shallow waters of the harbor. The battleship Arizona continued to burn fiercely, her forward magazines having exploded with such violence that her massive tripod mast had been blown completely off its foundation. The ship would burn for 2 more days, becoming a funeral pyre for the 1,177 sailors and Marines entombed within her twisted steel hull. The human cost of Japan's surprise attack was staggering in its scope and tragedy. 2,403 American servicemen and civilians died that morning, with another 1,178 wounded. The battleship Oklahoma alone claimed 415 lives when she capsized, trapping hundreds of sailors in her overturned hull. Rescue crews would work around the clock for days, cutting through the ship's bottom with acetylene torches in desperate attempts to reach air pockets where survivors might still be alive. Commander Casson Young of the repair ship Vestal demonstrated extraordinary heroism when he was blown overboard by the Arizona's magazine explosion, swam back to his ship through flaming oil, and resumed command to save his vessel and crew. His actions earned him the Medal of Honor and exemplified the courage displayed by countless individuals during those terrible morning hours. The psychological impact on survivors proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Seaman Second, Class Donald Stratton, burned over 65% of his body while serving aboard the Arizona, would spend months in military hospitals recovering from his injuries. His account of crawling across a rope line stretched between the Arizona and the Vestal, while covered in burning oil, became one of the most harrowing survivor testimonies of the attack. At the submarine base, Lieutenant Commander Edward Greenfell organized immediate salvage operations to recover classified materials and weapons from damaged vessels. His quick thinking prevented sensitive cryptographic equipment and torpedo technology from falling into enemy hands should Japanese forces attempt a follow-up landing on Oahu. The attack's strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate destruction at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Kimmel and General Walter Short, commanding Army forces in Hawaii, faced immediate relief from their commands as War Department officials in Washington demanded accountability for the intelligence failures that allowed such devastating surprise. The subsequent investigations would reveal systemic breakdowns in communication and analysis that had left America's premier Pacific base vulnerable to attack. President Franklin Roosevelt worked through the night of December 7th, crafting the speech he would deliver to Congress the following day. His famous "Date Which Will Live in Infamy" address would unite American public opinion behind the war effort and formally bring the United States into the Second World War as a full combatant against the Axis powers. The Japanese celebration of their tactical victory would prove short-lived as American industrial capacity began mobilizing for total war. Admiral Yamamoto's prescient warning that Japan had awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve would prove tragically accurate as American shipyards, aircraft factories, and training bases prepared to unleash unprecedented military production. Within hours of the attack, American cryptographers at Station Hypo in Hawaii began the painstaking work of breaking Japanese naval codes that would eventually lead to decisive victories at Coral Sea and Midway. The intelligence failures of December 7th would be transformed into the analytical successes that would doom the Japanese Empire's expansion across the Pacific Ocean. The smoke had barely cleared from Pearl Harbor when the transformation of American society began in earnest. By December 8, 1941, recruitment offices across the nation were overwhelmed with volunteers eager to avenge the surprise attack. Young men who had been reluctant to involve themselves in what many considered a foreign war now stood in lines stretching around city blocks, demanding the opportunity to serve their country in its hour of greatest need. The industrial mobilization that followed the Pearl Harbor attack would dwarf any previous economic transformation in human history. Henry Ford's massive Willow Run plant near Detroit was converted from automobile production to manufacture consolidated B-24 Liberator bombers at a rate of 1 aircraft per hour. The Kaiser shipyards in California began employing revolutionary mass production techniques that reduced the time required to build a Liberty ship cargo vessel from 6 months to an incredible 18 days. Admiral Chester Nimitz assumed command of the Pacific Fleet on December 31, 1941. Standing on the deck of the submarine Grayling as he surveyed the continuing salvage operations in Pearl Harbor. His first priority involved raising and repairing the damaged battleships while simultaneously planning offensive operations against Japanese-held territories across the Pacific. The Nevada, California, and West Virginia would all return to service. After extensive repairs, participating in later campaigns that would carry American forces to the shores of Japan itself. The strategic implications of Japan's failure to destroy Pearl Harbor's fuel storage facilities and submarine base became apparent within months of the attack. American submarines operating from the undamaged base began an aggressive campaign against Japanese merchant shipping that would eventually strangle the island nation's ability to supply its far-flung empire. The Wahoo, under Commander Dudley Morton, alone would sink 20 enemy vessels, demonstrating the effectiveness of unrestricted submarine warfare in the Pacific theater. The development of American naval aviation following Pearl Harbor revolutionized warfare at sea and vindicated the theories of air power advocates like General Billy Mitchell. The Enterprise and her sister carriers, having escaped destruction by pure chance, would spearhead the island-hopping campaign that brought American forces ever closer to the Japanese home islands. The Battle of Midway, fought just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, would demonstrate America's rapid recovery and adaptation to carrier-based warfare. The cultural impact of December 7th extended far beyond military considerations, fundamentally altering American society's relationship with the outside world. The isolationism that had characterized American foreign policy throughout the 1930s disappeared overnight, replaced by a determination to assume global leadership in the fight against fascism and militarism. According to documentation preserved in the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Presidential Library in Hyde Park, New York, the president's private correspondence reveals his understanding that Pearl Harbor, despite its tragic cost, had provided the national unity necessary to wage total war against the Axis powers. The attack had eliminated domestic opposition to American participation in the global conflict and ensured that the full might of American industrial and military power would be brought to bear against the enemies of democracy. The memorial erected Over the Arizona's sunken hull would become one of America's most sacred shrines, visited by millions of people seeking to understand the sacrifice of those who died that Sunday morning. The oil that continues to seep from the battleship's fuel tanks, nicknamed the Tears of the Arizona, serves as a perpetual reminder of the price of unpreparedness and the courage of those who died in service to their country. The lessons of Pearl Harbor would reshape American military doctrine for generations, emphasizing the importance of intelligence gathering, inter-service cooperation, and the maintenance of constant vigilance against potential enemies. The surprise attack that was intended to cripple American resistance instead forged a national determination that would carry the United States to victory in the Second World War and establish it as the world's preeminent military and economic power for the remainder of the 20th century.